Tell me, does the toppling of American missiles really compensate for having no hands?
Missiles are only the first step to prove our power.
Our power? With your disregard for human life, you must be working for the East.
East, west, just points of the compass, each as stupid as the other. I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. The four great cornerstones of power, headed by the greatest brains in the world.
Correction. Criminal brains. Do you expect me to talk?
Do you expect us to talk? Welcome to episode number 2 of a brand new podcast about James Bond 007, hosted by myself, Rebecca, Chris and Dave. And this week, we're talking about the very first big screen Bond movie, Dr. No, from 1962, starring Sean Connery and directed by Terence Young.
Very, very nearly not the first Bond film if they'd gone in order, though, and if history had played out a little different. Dr. No was actually the 5th James Bond book, so really strange how it ended up as the first Bond film. We'll kind of unfold it over the next few weeks as we get to different stories and certainly early on the different Fleming books. But if they'd gone in book order, Casino Royale would have been the first film, but that wasn't available for reasons we'll get to when we get to Casino Royale.
I always wonder what that would be like, a Connery Casino Royale. Like back in them days. I often wonder whether the Bond franchise would be the franchise it is now, or if it would have been a franchise if it took that route.
Alternate Bond history.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with Casino Royale, if you convert the book to a film, if you adapt it, there's almost not enough there. I mean, I can kind of see why they went the sort of teleplay route.
It's quite scant, isn't it, I think?
It is quite a short book. The first hour of the Daniel Craig film. I don't want to get too much into it because obviously we'll get there in several weeks' time. But certainly it was a good introduction to the character, but it's not necessarily the most cinematic. That isn't actually the reason it isn't the first film of the series. That was a whole rights thing that we'll get to. But there is an alternate universe where Thunderball's made somewhere around the late 50s as Longitude 78 West. And, well, there's various stories of how this could have unfolded, but at one time it could have even been Richard Burton as 007.
That would have been very interesting.
Yeah, well, I suppose back in the day, I mean, when I think of Richard Burton, I think of War of the Worlds and Where Eagles Dare, but...
yeah, but prior to that, I think he would have made quite a...
Well, the voice and I mean, I could certainly see Richard. There is an alternate universe where Richard Burton is a very, very good James Bond. But yeah, I mean, again, this story will unfold over the next few weeks. I kind of said this in the intro episode that this series has absolutely everything, and I don't mean the films. I mean the stories around it, the lawsuits, the firing of leading men, bankruptcies, and everything else, and also an awful lot of the path that wasn't walked. And certainly an alternate start to this universe was very, very close to happening. And when we get to Thunderball, there's quite a story there about how that all unfolded.
Very often, like the making of the Bond films are often as colourful as like the Bond movie plots themselves, aren't they? I think that's remarkable.
Yeah, it is. And actually, Dr. No is a relatively sort of almost prosaic start. I mean, it was chosen because it's so simple. It is quite a simple story.
It could actually happen in real life, or it could have happened in real life.
Yeah, and also on paper, once you start breaking it down, it's cheaper than From Russia with Love, which we'll
definitely.
Get this week. But From Russia with Love, although it's not quite as exotic because it tends to stay within mainly Europe, it has an awful lot more location and scale to it.
Yeah, because it was pretty much all shot on location in Jamaica. So basically, all they had to do was like film in Jamaica, and everything else was like shot in Paramount Studios in London. So
yeah, it's pretty much
so the majority of it was was relatively cheap, and there wasn't actually any. That's one of the things I've figured about in Dr. No was there was actually a lot of action scenes. There wasn't like actually a lot of set pieces that was that you normally establish with Bond. I mean, sure, you get to it, like the main base exploding at the end, but which would, I mean, I can only imagine, like, at the time was like, right, we need to have give the audience something to go wow, because we haven't really done that much.
No.
But I think it's one of those things that it's weird how, like, from that decision, like, it's come like a common Bond trope that the baddie's layer always has to explode at the end.
Given like the film's budget, was it 1 million?
Yeah,
It was a.
that
You do the Doctor No.
I was fighting the urge there.
That's really misleading because we talk about a budget of 1 million, and we tend to think of like modern exchange rates.
No, it was a lot of money in 1962.
No, but the point I'm making is that don't forget this is a British production. So if someone gave you £1 million today and you went and changed it to pounds, you'd have about 2/3 of that.
Sure.
3/4, something like that. Depending on exchange rate, you would probably have maybe 650,000. But the pound was an awful lot stronger against the dollar then. So the budget for this film, movie grosses and movie budgets are always in dollars for me because it's largely an American industry these days. But the budget for Dr. No was £300,000 because of the strength of the pound. So yes, that equates to about $1 million. They overran that budget, but the whole thing was made for $1.2 million, which is only about £350,000.
That's crazy when you think about it, isn't it? And they didn't even know it was going to be a success. It wasn't like it was just, oh yeah, this is, it's not like today, for example, we've got the Avengers or Captain America or those sort of movies, which are guaranteed tentpole movies for studios. Not like that back then at all.
No, and it was. I mean, when you watch the special features and read up on this film a little bit, they talk about making a $1 million film look like a $5 million film, and I think in a lot of ways they did achieve that. I don't look at Dr. No and think cheap. So some of the scenes in the film, and we'll get to it as we go along. But some of them are limited by the technology of the time, certainly some of the driving scenes. But I don't think of it as a particularly cheap film. It's shot on particularly nice film stock, particularly now it's been restored. We can see what a beautiful film it is.
It looks good. It looks kind of almost like new. I mean, on the Blu-rays, it looks stunning. I mean, the colours are nice and vivid. Jamaica looks absolutely gorgeous. It
was a wonderful way to start the film series, because I think for a lot of the early entries, the Bond films were a bit of a travel log. I think we've got past that era now where you get students taking a gap year and going all over the world. Well, that didn't happen back then.
No, everyone can travel now, whereas you could travel the world for the price of a cinema ticket.
So you've got this guy. I think that certainly in some of the early entries, we live vicariously through Bond. He goes where he wants and does what he wants, almost subject to his orders. But yeah, it's the whole genesis of the film we take for granted now because we're 23, nearly 24 films on from the start of this series. But it wasn't a surefire hit, and the film had no stars, as I can recall. I don't know if either of you guys know, but no one in this cast was a particularly big name.
No, because Sean Connery
was an unknown.
Yeah, I think the major, if you actually look at the publicity of the posters, it was all pretty much Ian Fleming's James Bond, and so I think it was more like banking on the popularity of the books, going like, look, we've made a film of this. I think that's where its money was on. So it had a relatively small budget for the time. I mean, I'm not expert in
nor am I
the economics, so
no, neither.
They do talk of the budget as extremely tight.
Yeah,
and I think that's the same for the first couple. Certainly when we get to From Russia with Love next week, there are a couple of little tricks in the way they film that. Just a couple of little scenes.
But I think
you wouldn't know that it was.
But I think they felt a little bit more confident in it. They thought like, okay, well, we know Dr. No did well. and so we've got a little bit more room to breathe, so to speak. So we'll feel more action, but we'll get to that.
But they're already using. What I'm saying is that even in the second film, where they've got a massive hit in the can, they've used money-saving tricks. I don't think these budgets were particularly luxurious, and I'll research this as we come to the films in the coming weeks. But I think the first budget we look at and we think, yeah, that's a comfortable, lovely budget is Thunderball.
Definitely, yeah, because it doubles, or kind of, well, definitely certainly goes up each time. Like, for example, by the time we get to Goldfinger in 1964.
Well, yeah, I mean, something I've got to tip my nod to. I might tip my nod. I'll just start again. All right.
I'm so sorry, my tongue tying is.
Doesn't matter. I've got to tip my hat to another podcast here, actually, because this fact I didn't know, but it came out on the Now Playing podcast when they started talking about Bond in the run-up to Skyfall. The telephone bill budget, the telephone bill for Moonraker was more than the budget for Doctor No.
What?
Yeah, this is a very... I've never independently verified that, but I do trust those guys to have done their research. And in all honesty, Doctor No is
it's all Roger Moore and his long distance phone calls.
Yeah, what are we doing?
Well, he's ringing adult chat lines, but we'll get to that. To Roger Moore. But
all those those reverse charges from space.
Listening to the commentary the other day, I noticed when the very first, not the first scene, but the first time you see London in the film, it's when Jamaica's gone down, and because Strangways and his secretary have been killed. And you've got those bank of like communication centres where it's like telephones and headphones and all the rest of it. They didn't have any money in the budget for that. Peter Hunt was saying in the commentary that he basically took some guy who worked for such said company who provide that stuff out for a couple of dinners.
Oh yeah, and he borrowed it, didn't he?
Yeah, no money.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Listeners, if you're out there, if you do own the Bond DVDs and Blu-rays, give the commentary a listen if you've not done already. It is fascinating.
It's fascinating with caveats, and the only thing I would say about that is, from a facts perspective, Becca's absolutely right. I mean, you will learn so much about the compromises made and all the rest of it. The only thing is, the early films were DVDs, commentaries did not exist before a lot of these people had died or were too old. So it's a very disjointed stitching together of different interviews over the years, whereas once you get to like Roger Moore's era, Roger Moore is there commentating on these.
He's still going strong.
Yeah, they're not the most fluent experiences, these commentaries, but absolutely, no. They are totally worth listening to for
Roger.
I mean,
basically.
Roger.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, Roger Moore. We'll get to Roger Moore. Roger Moore's commentaries I can't wait to listen to because
you love him, Dave, don't you? You love him.
I'm not the biggest fan of him as James Bond, but I love the guy, and I can't wait to listen to the commentaries, I have to say. But I know, I mean, Becca, if you've listened to the commentaries as well, even M's Office.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that was created as well. He sort of, Ken Adam goes into like the wood panelling and how he did it all basically on a shoestring budget. You wouldn't know it. But it's just really insightful. But
well, his desk is basically a paper finish.
Yeah.
And the famous
tricks of the trade.
Leather door is like plastic.
Yeah, you wouldn't know that.
You wouldn't know that.
No.
It is a basic setup, but it does look like classy, like
it looks like real oak panelled.
Yeah.
So I think the first person to give a shout out. I mean, we'll, as I say, I'm sure we'll get through the plot as we go, but just talking about the people involved in creating the modern Bond. But I think the formula was finished by the time we get to sort of Thunderball, but certainly this first three films up to Goldfinger, when Guy Hamilton comes in, we start seeing the tropes created. And we'll get on to Terence Young in a minute, but I've really got to give a shout out to Ken Adam here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think he's as strong as he becomes later on in the Bond franchise, but there are he definitely is like the look of Bond, and especially when it comes to like bad guys layers. Whenever you see like the kind of the very sort of always like sort of late 60s, like sort of slight early 70s, not that kind of weird kind of like extreme, very round looking objects and furniture and things like that. That looks like that. Yeah, that looks like pristine as well. That just that just looks like a Bond layer, that's like, or something out from Dr. Evil's layer. Some
of those are so iconic, though. I mean,
but it just looks great.
Dr. Evil without Dr. No.
Yeah, but I think the first thing that struck me was like the bit where what's his face, the guy at Bond like kills, like
Dent.
Yeah, Dent. He picks up like the spider, and then it's like the first. It's kind
of.
You're
talking about Ken Adams' set with the grate on the ceiling.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's just basically just a big, massive fucking room with nothing in it. But there's like, yeah, but it's just.
If I'm wrong, didn't the commentary tell us that cost something like £600?
Yeah, it was a lot of money, wasn't it? Because they sort of mentioned
they had no money.
They spoke to him about it and said,
money.
He's like, I'm not going to do that in £600 or something. I actually need 800. And Cubby Broccoli was meant to be like, well, we've got X amount of money, but we've got this contingency amount. So if you need X, we can provide it. And I was like, oh. It was very cheap to make.
It was, and yeah, I mean, I just remember again, skipping ahead a little. How excited were we all to see that office back at the end of Skyfall?
Yeah, that was the high point.
Some of the iconic, and all of the Bonds, with the exception of Brosnan, have stood in that office.
That's it. Yeah, Daniel Craig hasn't really had that. Bond having the pre-title sequence, seeing M being told off or receiving his mission, and then I think Spectre now looks to go back to those footsteps to follow that.
I mean, like, as much as I have like some issues with Skyfall, that moment was kind of like same feeling that people had, like Star Wars fans had when had House of 14, Chewie were home. It's the same sort of like things. Like it's like it felt like we're home. It's like
definitely that was the high point for me.
Yeah.
The best part of Skyfall was that with pleasure, and it's just like so exciting.
It ended in the most way where I feel like the end of most Bond films, well, actually no, pretty much all Bond films, to a certain degree, which is pretty much whenever I see a new one, at the end of it, I go, right, well, next one now.
Yeah,
right, I want to see the next one. I want like
it now.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter if I thought that film was shit. It's like, right, okay, that film was shit. Right, well, next one. It might have. It was okay. Right, okay, next one. So that's how I always feel. But that definitely was like a warming feel.
Oh, I'm excited now.
We talk about, I mean, I think we've all got to admit to anyone listening here, we've all read plot synopsises within synopses. What's the word?
Yes.
What's
I say synopsis, but
yeah, listeners, just we do have to tell you that all three of us have actually read the plot breakdown from Spectre within the last week. It started a lot.
Yeah, we're naughty. What can we say?
Over Messenger.
Not slap wrists all round.
Yeah, I kind of wish I didn't now, don't you?
Yeah, I spoiled the ending.
Actually,
no.
well, for me, I'm kind of glad I know going into it, but
I don't know. Some parts may have changed. You don't know.
There is that.
There was a different version a month later.
Yeah, exactly.
An awful lot of the plot is pretty much the same.
Yeah, I mean, we'll actually get into talk about Doctor No just in a minute, but
in a minute, we'll get there.
But I will say,
007.
I will say that the first half is pretty rocking, and it'll be worth the first half will be worth seeing, worth the price of admission alone. But
no spoilers, people. No spoilers.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to say anything. But I'm saying that the first half, it's like the last half where it kind of goes like, but.
None of us
we can all agree that Spectre will be a very exciting film.
I think the problem is the ending was quite small in our heads. When we picture the description of the ending, it seems really underwhelming, but I think a lot of it will be in the telly.
Could be, yeah, well, definitely, definitely. And I had no sense of what, well, I can say Spectre in it, but I had no sense of actually what Spectre was actually doing. So it just felt like
there's nothing in the script other than like they're called Spectre.
Yeah.
Ta-da! Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, I'm assuming the film will do more, but yes.
I think the whole point of like going on to Spectre here, and we'll talk about Spectre. I mean, we haven't
a great length.
Yeah, well, we haven't talked
Eventually.
about the schedule yet, but it's fairly sure we'll do something near its release. We won't have got as far as Spectre by the time Spectre is released, but I'm sure we'll talk about it as we go forward in the.
We could do an emergency podcast on day of release.
We may do. Oh God, yeah, I might have to travel for that. Anyway,
Yeah.
but we may even do that in the same room. I'm thinking if I commit to it on a podcast, we've got to. But anyway, so.
We'll see what we can do.
But certainly, what made me think of Spectre when I thought of Doctor No is that Office is back and Spectre are back, and those are tropes that are established in this very first entry.
Definitely, because it's like when the first. It's like one of the other tropes is Bond has a sit-down dinner with the villain and has a polite conversation about ethnics and like in a kind of weird kind of way. It's like kind of why don't you just kill him? But I think I think they do. I think Doctor No does actually state that he planned on trying to like persuade Bond to join. Which kind of adds some leeway other than the typical other tropes.
I definitely think, I don't know what you think, Becca, but I definitely think Doctor No is at its best in the first half, because I think in the first half of the film there is just something magical about Connery at this point. Whether it's his best performance as Bond or whatever, we'll get to that, I'm sure, as we talk in future weeks. I've certainly got a view on it, but in that first half where he's discovered in the casino, which is another beautiful looking set on very little money, and he's called into MI6 at night, and he's admonished by M over what gun he's choosing to use. The first interaction with Moneypenny, getting to Jamaica and being extremely businesslike with the people he deals with at the start of that sequence. He's absolutely, and then of course the thing I love in the early Bond films, where they played it a little long here, but certainly when he actually gets to a hotel room and actually checks it for bugs and things like that. I wish we saw more of that now.
Actually, he does his job as him being a spy.
Yeah, there is something about Connery. I mean, certainly until he goes to Crab Key, that is just magical in this film.
I agree, Dave. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think when it comes to things like searching for bugs, it gives Connery a sense of like, well, he's nobody's fool. He's like, he's like, you can tell even when he's like just sort of trying to chat up a lady. You tell her like in the back of mind, his mind's in the mission. He knows. There's ulterior motives. He's thinking about other things. He's kind of like a step ahead of the game. He's at least thinking about what might happen. Exactly that way. He's kind of thinking about his mission. He's actually playing detective. He's like, even when he's like as casual as flirting with women or chatting them up in some bar or going over to the house to kind of seduce them. And use the audience thinking, well, that woman clearly is trying to kill you, or she's part of Spectre, or she's working with the bad guys, But there's a good sense of like, well, Connery's not an idiot. He's already considered that, or he's already like he knows that, and he's playing her. It's almost like a dance of wits basically. I think. Basically, we lose that when we get to Moore. It basically just Moore's Bond is pretty much just like he just stumbles along stuff. It's just like things happen.
He's led by his
Oh, there was a bit, just skipping forward a little bit here. Once again, as we will do through all of these podcasts, but there was a bit in Casino Royale where Daniel Craig is with Solange in her. I think it's her suite, and he realizes that he has to leave to follow somebody else, and he orders caviar for one. Mm-hmm. And that no-nonsense attitude is something I haven't seen since Connery in a lot. I guess you could say Dalton. We'll talk about that when we get there too, but certainly we're going to talk about this more next week, because the best single Connery example of talking to a woman but the mission comes first is actually next week. But already we've got this sense of a guy who, I mean, he's at his physical prime. I mean, Connery at this point is about 32.
He looks good.
He's a lot slimmer than he gets later on.
That sounds really pervy, sorry.
He looks kind of older than 32, though. Do you not think?
He does. He does. That era's 32 is like this era's 38 when like Craig started, I think, you know. But
yeah, kind of meant to be at like, your physical peak. But I'd say I'm not meant to be leery or lechery or anything.
No, be as lecherous as you like. We can just like, you know.
Well, no, that's it. Well, so obviously there's a scene when, you know, he's in Jamaica, and he takes a shot off, and you can see that he has kind of worked out, but he's got in shape a little bit for the role. I mean, obviously he's not going to be as stacked as, for example, Daniel Craig was emerging from the sea. But it's like you can clear he has got that kind of like animal athleticism that, you know, the role requires. He's
rough and he's rugged.
That's the one.
And he's good in a fist fight. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, he's meant to be like an expert boxer. If you go back to Fleming, you know, Bond is like, yeah, expert boxer, crack pistol shot, you know, throwing knives and all the rest of it. So Connery's got it in spades.
He convinces me. There's no doubt.
Yeah, he's convinced me that he's a man who is dangerous.
Yeah, very deadly to know.
Yeah, but but basically, like the thing about Dr. No is that of all the Bond films, it's the one that plays out more like a detective film. Even though
there's a lot of scenes of him just like walking places, and I quite like that. I don't mind. I don't need necessarily. I mean, when we get to Brosnan, it's at its worst. And I'm not necessarily knocking Brosnan for that, but there was a period these films went through where there had to be an action sequence every 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, sort of lurch from one set piece to the next, really, didn't
Absolutely,
it?
and I quite like the fact that like Bond is normally at a walking pace in this film. You know, he strolls into reception at his hotel, he walks around his room and has a look at that. I kind of like that. I don't have a problem with it at all.
No, I mean, sort of looking ahead to the next film, From Russia with Love, that's why that's so popular as well, because it's more of a, you know, Bond films get more fantastical as they go along, but From Russia with Love is kind of more like a spy movie, detective thriller, and that's why it's so popular.
Yeah, I mean, same director as this week. I mean, Terence Young is very important to Bond lore. I mean, really, if obviously Ian Fleming created the character, Sean Connery was the first Bond, so obviously he's extremely important. But if you look at the cinematic James Bond, I think you're putting it, for me, at the feet of three people. I would say Ken Adam, because he created the look of these films. I would say Peter Hunt, because directed the best film in the series, but he was the editor right the way through to You Only Live Twice. And we can get onto that, but he was very, very innovative in the way he put these films together. And also, he had an awful lot of power in post-production. I mean, Nikki Van der Zyl, who voiced every woman in this film with the exception of Miss Taro and Moneypenny. And he hired her. So, I mean, but...
It's incredible.
It's incredible, but...
Yeah, a real coup for the series, I think.
Yeah, and when we get to Majesties, I will just spend 2 hours gushing and crying with joy. But
I would also like to throw in the hat Monty Norman, for making the iconic Bond theme.
John Barry, you can't forget John Barry.
Oh yeah, John Barry.
Yeah, I think I sold myself short at 3 here, didn't I? but
we're going to have to like 5 or 6 different people here.
Yeah, we'll come back to music in a moment, and we must do. But certainly, Terence Young had such an enormous role to play in making this series what it is.
I think he was the birth child of the spirit of Bond that we know and love, essentially. Because a lot of people actually always reference about Terence Young that he is basically Bond in terms of character. You know, he is that kind of person. I mean, not saying that he kills people and shags women countless, but he's that kind of like sort of straight to the point, confident kind of.
He's from that kind of privileged upbringing as well. So, and I kind of think he's credited with like creating what we know as the Bond formula as well. So obviously the girls, gadgets, guns, explosions.
It's literally one exception that I can think of. When we get to Goldfinger, I'll point it out. There is one enduring trope of the Bond films that started there. I mean, you can't even say gadgets, because I mean that started coming in with From Russia with Love.
Yeah, or certainly, well, rather than gadgets, like I don't know, trying to use modern or futuristic technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which kind of morphed into gadgets.
Well, the gadget in this film is basically the Walter PPK, which becomes like the mainstay of the franchise. Is gone. I find it kind of interesting how we're first introduced to that, and he kind of like accepts it reluctantly, as if he's like, I don't want this fucking gun. I'd rather have this like. I want this like man's prayer that like put me in hospital for 6 months.
I suppose because Major Boothroyd obviously not Desmond Llewellyn is like nice and light in the lady's handbag, and he's just like, oh, maybe that puts him off a little bit.
But it would do. As soon as you say lady's handbag, it's like, please.
Oh, I'm like, not again, no.
The whole point with Major Boothroyd in this film is that's named after a real Geoffrey Boothroyd, who was a friend of Ian Fleming's, and he actually wrote to him and said, "Why have you got Bond using this Beretta? It's a woman's gun." Well, I can't speak to the truth of that, but yeah, the whole quartermaster and the naming of him actually comes from real life. And the gentleman who actually said to Ian Fleming, "Don't use this gun, use this," and he suggested the Walter PPK.
Ah.
The other thing I find quite funny about this scene is relative to the books, because he's saying you were in tractions for 6 months last year after it jammed on you. And that is a reference to the end of From Russia with Love, which is actually like next week's film. Because Dr. No follows From Russia with Love, and From Russia with...
it was meant to be the series, wasn't it? So
From Russia with Love film ends on a cliffhanger of we think Bond might be dead. But we'll get to it next week, because From Russia with Love is actually a fantastic adaptation of the book. Dr. No is an okay book, but they've made a really solid story of it. I mean, they may not be big names, but they cast everything important right here, don't they?
Yeah, they play it well. I mean, that's one of the things I like about Dr. No is that it's simple, it's no nonsense, it's confident as well. I think if the Bond franchise didn't go further than Dr. No, I think it will still hold up as a good film. It won't just be like one of the things that kind of like was forgotten about. I think it would still be like remembered as like a decent film. I mean, maybe it might have had like a few other Bond films like scattered about here or there, but I think it will still be regarded as great.
Yeah, I mean, some of the casting just really, really. The one that always springs to mind for me is M. I just love Bernard Lee in this role, and he is to this day my favourite M. I mean, I like Judi Dench, and we'll talk about her during Brosnan and Craig's run, and she really is great, and I'm perfectly happy that they changed things up a bit, but I really like that they've gone back to Ralph Fiennes now, because he kind of reminds me of Bernard Lee.
He's got a military background as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, I just love Bernard Lee in this role. It's astonishing to think he was drunk in most scenes he filmed.
And he got quite poorly towards the end, didn't he? Bless him.
Yeah, I mean, there are still... Opinion on this is kind of... It's difficult to cut through to what is true, and I will research it more as we get there. But I believe he started filming For Your Eyes Only, which he isn't actually in, and the reason is he died of stomach cancer.
Yeah, he passed away halfway through.
Yeah, around that time.
Oh yeah, because that's the one film where there is no M, isn't it? It's one of them.
Yeah, he's on leave or something.
Mm.
And then it's back as Robert Brown in the next film. But yeah, I mean, Bernard Lee is just who wouldn't want to work for him, but who wouldn't want to do their best for him at the same time. You want to work for him and be you'd be intimidated for him, but you want to buy him, but you want to work for him nonetheless.
He kind of reminds me of, I kind of want to say Winston Churchill, but even though it doesn't, if you know what I mean,
No.
he kind of has.
I see what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, he kind of has that kind of like authority, kind of like, don't give a shit. Kind of like what I say go. It's like you can reply back, but yeah. Doesn't matter, but I'm not even going to get angry about it too much because I'm in charge. So jog on.
My way or the highway?
Oh, basically, yeah. But I think that's kind of thing it kind of responds to. I think that's kind of what Bond needs as someone in charge, someone to be like, kind of like, well, I'm in charge, so yeah, do as I say, because I'm in charge. Almost kind of no nonsense, but like kind of laid back about it. I suppose that's what we're trying to get at.
This film, above all of them, and I sometimes forget this detail, and it's only just occurred to me now again, is there is an awfully heavy burden on Sean Connery in this film, because he leads every scene. After he's introduced, I mean, certainly after his scene with M, he is like the alpha in every scene. And I know that sounds obvious because it's a James Bond film, but nobody knows who this guy is. No one has seen this series before. And he is absolutely dominant in every scene he's in thereafter. And some of those scenes are kind of controversial as well. I mean, certainly the Dent scene, the audience of the time could end up disliking Bond off that.
Yeah, there was controversial at the time, even then, about like, is this too much? He basically shoots an unarmed man. I think Terence Young actually sort of, I think I'm not sure who he spoke to like the actual censors about it, and he was like saying he basically like put it in a situation. Well, basically, he's got a license to kill. He's basically like, this guy's gone here to kill him, with the intent. He's just caught him red-handed. So basically, he's entitled to do what the fuck he wants. that kind of thing. But I'm sure that rubs some people the wrong way. But then that's his character. That's who he is. He's a guy who got license to kill. So we will take out the bad guy, even if he is unarmed. He will do it.
I think we forget. I mean, I don't know what you think, Becca, but we kind of forget, because we've had so many films since. That must have. We take it for granted that, like, here's this guy and he's got a license to kill, and he's still kind of the hero of the film. Would that have been the case in 1963 with this? 1962, sorry.
I think so, yeah. I think that's why Roger Moore gets so much kind of derision, because it kind of there's occasional moments where he's kind of really quite mean. Like there's one in Man with the Golden Gun where he kind of twists Miss Anders' arm, and you think, ooh. But yeah, it's kind of known for like the comedy and the kind of like gentler side, but dangerous, as it were. But I think you're right. In sort of 1962, I think that probably would have been the case.
Well, the things I like about the parts I like about Roger Moore is the bit where he's mean. It's the kind of like the bit in the Spy Love Me where like henchman's like hanging off his tie off the end of Kilding, and he sort of teases him for information. He just slaps him away. Yeah, he's like thanks.
You got the point.
What a helpful chap.
Yeah, what a helpful chap, that's the one.
I think you got the point with Thunderbolt.
Yeah.
Thunderbolt.
Yeah. And Countess.
Edit that out.
No, but it's relevant because like Dr. No was like the first thing where they take out the three blind mice. I call them the three blind mice. It's really 4 Jamaican guys straight in a car.
They're not blind, none of them.
Yeah. I mean, well, for starters,
they play blind.
Yeah, it's the oddest Bond.
They're con men.
It's the oddest Bond intro ever, because it kind of like it starts off with the gun barrel, then it goes into this weird kind of Jamaican little number, then it goes to 3 blind mice. You follow these kind of like 3 blind men, and they assassinate some dude, and they kills secretary. But yeah, they're barely in it. I mean, like, and they're quite memorable. I mean, because they have like 3 scenes. Is that right? I mean, they've got the intro, the bit where they kind of try to take out Bond.
You kind of see them in the background and stuff. When he turns up at Government House, they are in the background there, but they're not a big plot point. I mean, I could totally imagine somebody sat and summarising Dr. No and not even mentioning them.
No, they're not. They're sort of, they're kind of mentioned in the opening titles. But
the gun barrel is a really interesting trope, though. I mean, We talked about it a little bit last week, where we talked about gun barrels we like or don't. Complete accident. You know, it was part of the title song, if you like. Certainly the title sequence of this film, and it became important to every film that followed. But it's not even Sean Connery.
No, how about that? That's a pub quiz question.
Well, the pub quiz question would be, who is it?
Who is it exactly?
And not Sean Connery would not be a winning answer. It's actually Bob Simmons, the stuntman. I mean, you would have seen him in an awful lot of stunts in that film without knowing it. The most obvious example of a stunt in that film where, and again, I've got to give a shout out to another podcast because James Bond Radio pointed this out. I didn't even notice. There's a bit in Dr. No where he's going through the vents. Do you remember that? Where he gets So there's a bit where he's climbing down and it is not Sean Connery and it is really obvious. And they're not even hiding it. That you can see this man's face full on.
I'm going to have to go back and watch that.
Yeah, it's really obvious once you know it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
But the other famous bit in this film where you will have seen Bob Simmons is the tarantula.
Oh, yes. No, I have to skip past that part though. That's
actually that bit of music actually is that used again in is used again. Is it From Russia with Love? That
I have heard it.
Yeah.
It was I don't know, and I will look out for it because it will reappear.
Yeah.
It's earlier on in Doctor No, isn't it? You've got the bit where the driver who sent to collect him, who turns out to be a sort of would-be assassin, kills himself, and then it's used again during the tarantula scene.
Right. That's yeah. What is extraordinary, and I don't think we realise it now because we're used to editing being A, quicker, and B, an awful lot more flashy, but breaking the rules of cinema at the time will have been so much more controversial. And thinking of where he's driven towards Government House and he pulls the guy over and the guy kills himself with a cyanide cigarette.
Yeah, he's like, hell with you, and then dies.
It's either Smith or Jones, and I can't remember. But
I always thought until recently that when he takes the thing, he actually tells him, he's like, but he actually doesn't.
No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't.
He's just hell with you like that.
But even there, Sean Connery throws a punch with one hand and lands it with the other.
Yeah, a bit of continuity error.
Just editing things like that, and Peter Hunt talks about it on the commentary. It's quite fun about it. They're not trying to hide it. They're just the scene cuts together better if you do it that way.
It looks better that way, yeah.
But very much about what works, and
he's not really breaking the fourth wall, is he? So.
No, and certainly when we get later into the series and we get to Peter Hunt's directorial effort, we will see both the editing of a future Bond director, but we will also see the most unusually edited Bond film of the lot. He was quite willing to do things a bit differently, and he sets a tone here. And yeah, I mean, I mentioned her earlier in the podcast, but Nikki van der Zyl is huge in Bond history, and she is a Peter Hunt hire. Nikki van der Zyl voices, correct me if I'm wrong here, Becca, she voices Bond girls through till, I've got to try and get this right, I think it might be You Only Live Twice. I'm not sure she voiced beyond that.
Well, they played a lot with like dubbing like voices, because obviously they did Ursula Andress, but even like the villains like in Thunderball, and Goldfinger. Scott's not Goldfinger's original.
Definitely.
Yeah, because the original people, like, they got them with like such strong European accents, so like no one's gonna fucking understand a word these guys are saying.
Yeah. Well, she was a voice coach to get Frober as well, wasn't she, on Goldfinger too?
Yes, because she's bilingual. She speaks.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So, no, Dave, I think that's correct. I shall have to have a look. But I think you're correct there.
But certainly, a lot of the Bond girls that we think of are voiced by her, and you are talking almost every female in this film, with the exception, as I say, of Miss Taro, who is the lady Bond sleeps with just before Dent comes in to try to kill him. And Moneypenny, I mean, it was always Lois Maxwell's voice in that regard. But every Bond girl, Sylvia Trench, Honey Rider, all voiced by Nikki van der Zyl, and that is true almost all the way through. She voices Tatiana next week. She voices Domino. She voices both Masterson sisters in Goldfinger, Jill and Tilly.
Really?
Yeah, and it's just extraordinary. I can't think of an editor with that much power. And the sad thing about Peter Hunt is he's remembered for Majesties, which, although I think it's an amazing film, is considered underperforming at the box office, and he never got to work on the Bond films again.
That's a shame.
Yeah, yeah, it's
in a nutshell.
Yeah, it really is. But yeah, there are some incredible things in the first few films that last for years to come, and you don't really notice it. And editing style is one of it. Films were, I mean, we think now of Bourne and shaky cam and things like that, which is kind of going out of fashion all of its own now. But so many films where action is supposed to feel immediate, and it's like a step change in the way films are put together.
That kind of style of editing, not just for the Bond movies, but it also had a knock-on effect on any other kind of like action movies throughout the rest of the decade. So like modern, the quick way that films are edited now, I don't think you would have had that maybe without Peter Hunt, or certainly, you know, much later down the line. So maybe not just Bond, but also kind of like modern action movies, I guess.
Yeah, I think Bond is kind of like, would you say like it is the original action franchise. He is like, I don't want to say he's like the first movies like action character, because I don't think he is. I think I'd be doing like tons of like films and it's just
of other things.
Yeah, but I think in terms of like of a mega franchise, like in some sort of like commodity that just really took off. You know, he is the epitome of like action films. He's like, you know, basically watching Bond films got me into action films, and I adore action films.
Well, there we are.
There isn't a franchise. I mean, this series will hit its peak at the box office until Skyfall, anyway, with Thunderball. And certainly when you look at Goldfinger and Thunderball, that sort of double punch, 64 and 65, I'm not sure there's been anything bigger to that date. Now, you had odd films that gross higher, like Gone with the Wind, a bit later on The Sound of Music and so on. But all of those films were one-offs, and they also got multiple re-releases. In terms of a character turning up in an unoriginal property, which sequels certainly didn't have the drawing power they've got now, you know, absolute pandemonium at the premieres with just enormous amounts of the general public there. I think this was breaking new ground. I don't know that we saw anything quite like this till we got to Star Wars.
No, I'd say it's a completely new phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, it has been compared to sort of Star Wars and maybe like Lord of the Rings and kind of the really big.
There've been bigger franchises since. There's no.
Oh, sure.
I mean, Harry Potter outgrossed it in 8 films.
Definitely, yeah. Well, that was up until
Star
that
Wars
point.
is
The
definitely
biggest.
bigger. No one is going to argue any different there.
No.
But certainly there was a period in the mid-60s where this whole franchise, and it was becoming a franchise at that point, had really captured the zeitgeist.
Maybe eclipsed perhaps by the Beatles.
Yeah, exactly. You've got like the Beatles, Muhammad Ali. You've got the Beatles, Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay, and James Bond.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And every guy want to be James Bond.
Well, that's it. All the guys want to be him, all the girls want to be with him, you know.
That's the classic line.
That sounds very cheesy now, doesn't it?
I think some of it is certainly of its time, and
but basically, it's ultimately it's the ultimate fantasy, though, isn't it? You know, that's essentially what Bond is. You know, it's the kind of, he gets to do stuff that, you know, you wish you could. You know. Yeah. To a lesser or greater extent.
Yeah.
Like travel the world, like, you know, go on secret missions, like, you know, sleep with exotic women, or do loads of cool shit, you know, save the world, that kind of stuff. Is like, fucking yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in these early films, you see him like order green figs for breakfast or something, and like that's a big deal because it's like seriously as exotic food, and we just don't kind of get that now. And Bond being expert on wine, well, you know, and all that sort of thing, the general public didn't know a damn thing about wine, and
No.
why would they? And so that's what I mean about product of its time, because what this film was appealing to, the general public now don't have.
Yeah, but I think even something like wine is still impressive. I mean, like, it's not like not everyone knows their wine, really. You know.
You didn't know there's a correct temperature to drink Dom Perignon 64.
Exactly. Yeah, but there's like
I mean, yeah, I mean,
there's like, you know, but things like Bond like knows his shit. You know, but it's not just like he doesn't like look at the menu and go, "Oh, that'd be nice." Like, you know, he knows he probably knows exactly what will go well with any meal it's put in front of him. You know what I mean?
yeah,
He knows not to eat red wine with fish.
yeah. We'll get to that next week. But
Yeah.
the most obvious example.
You know what? That's probably why I know that.
Yeah, that is unfortunately why I knew that as well. It's like, obviously I don't eat red meat. I'm
I
vegetarian.
mean, it makes sense once you
so if I'm having
think
fish,
about it.
if I'm going to drink wine, I drink white wine. I don't have red wine
yeah,
with
it's
fish
chicken-
because JJ was a communist agent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it really gets to its sort of apex for me when we get to "You Only Live Twice," and he very pointedly tells the audience what temperature sake should be served at.
Yeah.
And then very, very pointedly shows off this knowledge to Tanaka.
Oh, I'm great.
It really was wish fulfillment, and yeah, I mean, even down to, I mean, the Bond girl trope starts here as well. We haven't actually mentioned Ursula Andress yet.
Yeah, it's
Shocking.
I don't know. Okay, so where does Ursula Andress rank in the Bond girl like sort of rank?
I'm gonna leave you this
for
to
you
you guys.
No, I'm not talking about. I'm just talking about as a character, as an element in Bond, because obviously like you know the Bond girl is always like a thing. It's like the car. It's like, you know, the gadget, or it's like Bond himself. You know, there's always like, you know, it's a particular element inside Bond. So where does that rank? I mean, I'm not just talking about, oh, she's hot. You know, where does she rank for you guys? Because like for me, she's kind of like the ultimate original. But obviously things have gone on since then, and I'd say probably better. But you know, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I kind of agree there, really. I think sort of within Bond you've got two types of women. Obviously like damsel in distress, and sort of like the inverted commas like good girl. And then when we get to films like Thunderball, you've got characters like Fiona Volpe, who's like, obviously she's on the bad side of the baddies.
Awesome's the word you're looking for, but
That's the one.
Fiona Volpe's amazingly good.
Yeah, she's a really good actress. I think she's one of the most glamorous Bond girls
Yeah.
as well. I was going to try and do a really bad quote, but you know, it was one of them like in the film where it's like she's meant to, you know, Bond makes off to her and she hears Heavenly Choir singing, but not me, or something like that.
That's
We'll get
another
that.
wonderful example of the coldness of Connery's Bond, and I can't wait to get there in about 3 weeks' time, because when people look at Daniel Craig, they kind of think it's an updated Dalton, and he isn't. He's Connery, and we'll get to why when we get there. But there are scenes in Thunderball, several of them, that are Daniel Craig.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, just to bring this back to Ursula Andress.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got carried away.
No, it's all right. You mentioned Red Dead, and we just got carried away.
Oh, was it the pretty word? But no, she's it's just really good. I think she's probably kind of like, yeah, you're the blueprint for sort of the Bond girl character. I mean, she's quite strong. She's self-taught. She's travelled the world. She knows her worth. She knows what she's capable of. And she's not afraid to kind of show their sensitive side, and also show Bond that, you know, she's quite tough as well. So
Yeah,
Ultimate Bond girl.
essentially she's kind of like I was going to say a wildling, but it's like you could kind of like sort of shoo her off as saying, "Oh, she's dumb." She's not dumb. She's just like this. All this kind of shit is like a new experience for her. She's like, I don't fucking know me. I'm just like, I'm a nature girl. You know what I mean? I'm out independable. I'm just happy doing what the fuck I'm doing. But you know, but she's still resourceful and she's still like,
yeah, she led this kind of like peripatetic lifestyle, and she's saying, well, I started reading Encyclopedia Britannica, and from A, now I'm up to D or something like that.
I find it very difficult to comment on the Honey Rider character, and a lot of that I think is the order I saw these in, because I was thinking earlier about the Connery Bond films. Firstly, I saw 3 or 4 Roger Moore films before I even got to Connery, and in terms of Connery's Bond films, I'm trying to think what I saw last. Of all of his films, forget Never Say Never Again, but certainly of his Eon films, I either saw Thunderball or this last, and I can't remember which. So at that point, you're looking at it being somewhere around the 10th Bond film I saw. So Honey Rider walking out of the water has absolutely nowhere near the same effect on me. And I've already seen Tatiana, I've already seen Pussy Galore, I've already seen, let me think, I've already seen, probably by that point, Triple X. I've already seen Melina Havelock.
It's quite an iconic scene, though, isn't it? I mean,
it is
compare it to Venus as it has before.
Absolutely. But
you're saying it doesn't have that impact?
You literally judge a character by the first 4 seconds she's on film.
And that's basically her just coming out of the sea going like...
Yeah, absolutely. Then sort of shaking her hair a little bit.
And then like, who's this Scottish guy singing at me?
That is weird. I can't imagine Daniel Craig singing. I can't imagine him like trying to get the woman interested by like singing to whatever it is she's singing under her breath.
Are you looking for shells? No, I'm just looking.
Yeah, that is a bit pervy.
That is very pervy, Sean.
Yeah, it could have been worse. he could have been up to God knows what, because he hidden himself and yeah. But yeah, there's no doubt to me Honey Rider's exit from the sea doesn't have the same impact on me just because it was about the 10th Bond film I saw. So why is that any more interesting than, say, Bond walking into his hotel room and there's Tatiana in his bed? Why is that any more interesting than My Name is Pussy Galore, I Must Be Dreaming? We think of that as the iconic sort of Bond girl entry into a given film, and it probably is. I'm totally in a minority here. I'm quite happy to accept it is. But there's been plenty of impressive Bond girl entrances to scenes. You know, even Tracy in Majesties, that is like kind of unique. And this doesn't stand out to me. But like I say, if I'd been around in 1962 and seen this, I'm sure it would have been mind-blowing. That was probably quite a skimpy bikini for those days as well.
It was quite skimpy. But I think, I was again listening to the commentary, and she was saying how she designed it herself with the costume designer. So
she's nude in the book.
Yeah, that was my next comment. I was like, much more racier in the book.
Yeah, not quite sure to get the PG rating if that was a given.
No.
But then again, it is a pretty. You forget like some of these like earlier films that some scenes are actually pretty brutal, and you think, hang on, fucking PG.
Yeah, quite violent as well. It was much more violent than anything you would see today.
Yeah, I mean,
not like Game of Thrones violent, but Bond.
I seem to recall the first sort of sex scene with like top half female nudity in it was something like 1958, The Lovers, French film.
Oh God, yeah,
we're only looking like 4 years before this, so yeah, this would have been pretty shocking at the time. No, I'm not saying Honey Rider coming out of the sea would have been shocking, but it's pushing
in terms of the sex and violence, pushing the envelope for sure.
And the violence. So the thing that really shocked me actually. It's a little bit inconsistent in that way because you see Strangway shot in very early in the film, and it's quite clear he hasn't been shot. There's no blood, there's no bullet entry, there's no nothing.
There's blood in his mouth though, isn't there?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure actually. I'll have to look at that again. But I know his secretary shot in the very next scene.
And that's red paint all
Yeah,
over the
yeah, but
face.
there's blood. I mean, it might. How convincing you find it's a different matter, but
No,
there's
but
blood.
she has quite a bloody death, doesn't she? Unfortunately.
And when Bond goes there later and looks at the scene, there's blood in the carpet.
Horrible.
So it would have been pushing it, and it also pushed it in other ways. I mean, there's a scene later in the film where he's in bed with Miss Taro. That is the first Hollywood film, I think, where a man and a woman, an unmarried man and woman, are in bed together.
Ah.
I don't know if I've got those details right or not.
No, I was trying to think.
We're going to claim it here now.
I'm going to claim it. It's true because I said it.
There we are.
It was the first time on film ever Sean Connery was in bed with that woman.
And that is a fact.
That's a fact.
That's
Sean
fact.
Connery had never been in bed with that woman on film ever.
No, that's true. That is true. That is a fact.
And the censors thought shocking. Positively shocking.
A hairy chest? No, gotta cover it up.
So I'm going to go with so basically Ursula Andress, Honey Rider, she did a great job, I thought. What do we think of Joseph Weissman as the formidable Dr. No?
Oh, terrifying. I think if you want to get a really good Bond villain in, you need to get somebody with real sort of what's the word I'm looking for?
Again, I mean, he's kind of like the
real plight.
Yeah, well, basically, he's like the classic Bond villain in a sense. Cause he's the kind of like the like Honey Rider. He's the original. He's the kind of like.
Isn't he wearing an Irish shirt or a coat? Or have I got that wrong?
Yeah, but he basically he's got it all down. So he's got something weird going on with him. He looks
Blofeld with hair.
Yeah, and well, yeah, but basically he's the first Blofeld in a kind of weird way. Even though he actually says that he's working for Blofeld to a lesser extent.
But, yes, he is. In the way he comes across on film, he's kind of Blofeld with hair.
Yeah, but he's this kind of like really calm, kind of like he's a man with a plan. He thinks things through. He's kind of
he's even trying to Bond.
Doesn't raise his voice at all. But there's something kind of snake-like about him in the fact that he's got like metal hands.
We take that for granted now. You've just said he didn't raise his voice. That seems so obvious now, but it's not.
Yeah, he's very sort of calm and sort of about
until
at the end.
You would expect the antagonist to be slightly more soft with each other.
I say that because at the end of the dinner scene where Bond basically tells him to go fuck himself is
actual dialogue.
Yeah, this is what
not really. But again, I will add even in that scene, I love how like little Bond characteristics, how like the throwaway comment where he takes Honey Rider away and so, like he basically tries to save Honey Rider, say, look, just let her go. Just she's not going to know it. So, look, what she does know, it's not going to fucking stop anything. Just you might as well just let her go. You kind of like trying to save her. First and foremost, he kind of goes, so, yeah, I agree. Sort of, you can leave. Like the men will have a fun kind of thing, and it's like Bond kind of gets angry and takes like a.
Chris, you're telling me this. I feel like I was on set.
Well, yeah, but it's
fucking accurate, real dialogue and everything.
This is amazing.
I know I am ad-libbing. I'm kind of like so.
Also, Bond didn't at any point just go, it's got fuck all to do with her.
Original dialogue people do.
If I wrote the script,
okay.
If I wrote the script, but I like.
I'm gonna get my nuts wet later. That sort of thing.
But I like the little character reaction how he does kind of gets angry and tries to kind of get.
He crushes that little.
He crushes the statue, doesn't he? The Buddha.
Well, Dr. No does. That's his kind of anger, like basically show of anger. You can tell like he's kind of like you're just a stupid policeman, but that's him like rattled. But even then,
they're basically Vulcans Bond villains, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is logical.
It's all kind of logical and
fascinating.
Very from no emotion.
Yeah,
logical, Captain.
But even little things like that, and how like Bond is always like sort of tries to hide a knife, and he's always thinking about something he could do.
He's trying to get ahead to the next step.
Exactly.
But in that sense, he's kind of like the opposite to Bond as well. You were talking about earlier how like he's always got like he may be romancing a woman, but he's got the mission in his mind. Whereas Doctor No is pretty much always thinking about his plan and what what the next step is. And this sort of meeting with Bond is just a informality. No, a formality. Sorry. So yeah, this meeting with Bond is a formality, and he's always thinking ahead to the next step.
Another sort of difference from the book that we get in the film series is all through the Connery era, and that includes Lazenby's as well. Spectre, as we're about to see again this year, are the villain. And of course, in a lot of the books, it was Smersh. Spectre was only in like a self-contained trilogy. And that's quite an interesting thing. And it was about cooling down East-West tensions.
It was. So like one came out of the other, wouldn't it? Was it Smersh? Spectre emerged from Smersh. It's basically stands for Spionum, basically death to spies.
Yeah, and I think that there was a thinking, certainly with the Cuban Missile Crisis the previous year and so on, that like, do we really want to be putting out films worldwide that are painting these guys as villains? And so Spectre was seen as a little bit more neutral as a choice. Yeah,
it's more like an international terrorist organisation.
Well, yeah, he does say at some point just points east-west, just points on a compass.
That's it. And like in Thunderball, you kind of have that great big meeting, and they're like, oh, number 6 from America, and number 2 from Japan, and things like that. So
yeah, it's really quite interesting actually, because I can't wait to.
Well, maybe not number 2 because Largo's number 2, but never mind.
Largo's number 2, yeah.
Where do you think Dr. No was? What number was he when he got offed?
Well, we don't know. Was Largo?
I don't know. Or maybe he was number 2, and then Largo shuffled along.
Yeah, I kind of got to think Largo's kind of smug with himself. I think he's kind of like someone's like, yeah, I just got the promotion.
I Dr. No is kind of acting
head.
No, I think of him as almost like acting separately from Spectre. He's part of Spectre, but he's almost like a contractor.
Interesting.
It's almost like Dr. No over here is part of our sort of, he's almost like a subsidiary. I don't know. We'll never know now.
No, we'll never know now.
But yeah.
I like Joseph Wiseman, listen.
I certainly think the first half of this film is where all of the things I love about it are. I mean, you've got locations, you've got I still think the best entrance in cinema history.
Oh, definitely.
You've got these sets that look expensive when they're not. You've got a guy who does whatever he likes, apart from if M tells him different. You've got the best M in the series. You've got exotic locations. You've just got everything.
So, Dave, is this the best Bond movie then, in your opinion?
Oh God, no! No, we're gonna we're gonna get to a lot better than this, but I still have it sort of in my top 6 somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely think, and most of that is on the first half, because I mean, I saw this on the big screen only about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and he's just magnetic, Connery. So many times I see Dalton and Craig putting in far, far better acting performances. And then you project Connery, and I remember why he was a film star. But you get past the halfway stage, you get to Crab Key, and the film runs out of juice a little bit. And certainly Dr. No is kind of bigged up beyond anything we actually end up seeing.
Yeah, you don't see him until very late in the film, do you? It's in the last quarter.
I love this film. I think it's really, really great, but
it stands up, doesn't it? I think it kind of. I mean, obviously, it's like sexism and racism.
It's a step on the journey. I mean, certainly what we get to next week is stronger.
Definitely.
That's no spoiler. I think From Russia with Love is it's got far more dimensions to it. Where it relates into something like Goldfinger, we'll get there, because I keep changing my mind on that. but certainly there are more consistent Bond films. It is a problem of the Bond series in general, that they tend to have better as much as we talk about villains' lairs and how these films end, they nearly always have better first halves, and we'll see that again and again through the series. And I think that's a film problem in general, that you build up a film, particularly if it's in the action genre, and then you just go for pretty mind-numbing bullshit action in the last third. And I think we can see that here. This is a very, very interesting film for about 2/3 of its running time, and then it becomes action as it was done in the 60s.
Yeah, it kind of trails off towards the end, doesn't it? I think, like, to skip ahead to like Quantum of Solace, I think that's where that kind of failed a couple of times. It kind of, instead of having more of a, I mean, it's an enjoyable action movie, but it's perhaps not so much a Bond movie. It kind of lurches from one set piece to set piece to set piece. And
I will say.
Oh, sure.
I will say this about the action. I do think it's a flaw when you're fighting your key villain and both of you are masked.
Yeah,
and you kind of don't really sort of... I know it's like, oh, okay, we kind of get that you... But...
That reminds me of the Batman Begins, where they start having a fight in the first scene of the film and just throw them both in mud, so you can't do any work.
Yeah, you can't tell who's who, can you?
Yeah, the action's not done that well, but I mean, it's relative. The thing we'll also see right the way through to, believe it or not, the Living Daylights, is this tendency to speed up footage.
Oh.
It's not as bad in this film as we'll see.
Thunderball is probably the worst culprit that springs to mind of the early Bonds.
God, the Thunderball is a terrible culprit. The pre-title sequence in Majesties is pretty noticeable.
That's cringeworthy.
But yeah, as late as the late 80s, they were still doing it. I'll point the scene out when we get there, because you may not have noticed it. There's one very obvious use of it in The Living Daylights. And so action-wise, it's never going to stand out. We've had 50-odd years of action films since. But what certainly stands up is the sets, the casting, and as magnetic a leading performance as I've ever seen.
I think we should probably leave it there, shouldn't we? I think we could wrap it up.
Well, we could. I mean, to be honest, we could talk for like another hour, really. I mean, we've not even touched on Hawaii Five-0.
Let's keep talking.
No, we haven't.
We haven't even touched on Hawaii Five-0's Jack Lord as Felix Leiter, and
we got to do that. Keep going.
So, things like they got Jack Lord as Felix Leiter. I mean, Leiter has always been like a confusing character in the Bond series. Like they changed. Like literally change the actor every 5 seconds. Basically, all the casting, they bring back another guy who's played it before to come back. It just seems like a very revolving door. You know, I wonder if who plays him in the Craig ones?
Jeffrey Wright.
I wonder if Jeffrey Wright's going to get recast soon. I do wonder.
The funny thing about Felix Leiter is there's been more Felix Leiters than there've been James Bond in
the
series.
Thinking that.
But he isn't necessary, in as much as From Russia with Love's many people's favourite, he's not in that. Majesties is a lot of people's favourite, he's not in that. He's not in quite a lot of the Roger Moore films, and a lot of people love, for example, The Spy Who Loved Me, he's not in that. He's not in any of the Brosnan films, although there's a bit of a facsimile of him, which we'll get to. So he's strangely a character that I like him to be there, but he really doesn't have to be there.
No, he's got a cult following, hasn't he? I think.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of... It's another thing that tells you what Bond era you grew up with, because when I think of Felix Leiter, I think of C. Slinder. And he's probably one of the worst Felix Leiters of the lot, but he was in Goldfinger, and that must have been.
No, I think the worst Felix is Fiore's Only. That's the worst Felix Leiter.
Felix isn't in that. Do you mean The Living Daylights?
Living Daylights, yes.
John Terry.
Yes.
John Terry, yeah. Why? Why?
The footballer.
He's only in it for about 30 seconds.
Sorry, Mr. Terry, but why?
There's not really any point to him.
Well, the thing is, he's just basically like an American on holiday. That's basically what he is.
Pretty much. It's just an excuse for a bit of the.
I don't know why he's in it. He's not necessary at all to the plot.
No.
And in the very next film, they get back like Roger Moore's Felix.
It's to move the plot along, I think.
Yeah, but the point I'm making though is if you started ranking Felix Leiters, I mean.
You got David Hedison, then Jeffrey Wright.
You would certainly go like Jeffrey Wright, David Hedison, Jack Lord, not necessarily in that order, but that'd probably be like your top three.
That's my reverse, yeah.
And yet, the first person I think of is Cease Linder, which tells me that is the first Felix I saw. It must be. But he's a bit of a nothing character in a strange kind of way in the films. And I know that he's been cut out of the last couple of Craig films if we include Spectre in that. And a lot of fans have sort of been up in arms about it. And I don't really see why, because Felix has actually never been that important.
No, but I say we talked earlier
Except
about
License to Kill, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked earlier about this film casting a bunch of unknown actors. Was Jack Lord like a big star at the time? I mean, was he perhaps more famous than all of them, or was it again his approach?
You know what? I'm gonna have to look that up for the simple reason that I think it was pre.
I think it was pre-Hawaii Five-0.
Yeah, it was pre-Hawaii Five-0. I know one of the reasons they considered casting him was that he was considered a bit too good-looking against Connery. I'm not saying they thought he was better looking than Connery, but he was too much competition. I know.
Oh, yeah, Hawaii Five-0 is 1968, so yeah, definitely pre.
I'm actually looking through his filmography now, and I can't see anything big. There's nothing big before Doctor No.
No, he still looks quite stylish, though, doesn't he? Even though he's kind of like, oh, who?
He looks like a star.
Taylor.
He looks
like he's like, oh, mine's a guy in Washington.
I like his intro. Basically, like he kind of like looks like he could be a bad guy because he's kind of like sort of got his eye on Bond, but and then
he didn't know who he is to begin with.
And then literally like Bond has a fight with Quarrel and the other dude and like
Puss fella.
Yeah, and Fleet and Leiter comes up with a gun and sort of like and holds him up, then finds out, oh, you're British service. Oh, we're best of mates now. It's kind of I kind of like how funny they pretty much like slap each other on the back after having a bit of a fist fight. You know? But I suppose that's probably a sign of the times. It's like, you know, don't mind having a bit of a fight, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, you're on our side. Oh, cool, welcome. Let's have a drink.
If you take the books out of it and just look at the films, I'm not sure what Felix is meant to be to Bond. In as much as you look at this film and you've got an equivalent, you've got a good-looking American agent of probably a similar age without looking up Jack Lord's age at the time. Then you get to Thunderball, jumping Goldfinger for a minute, and you've got a similar, albeit a different person. Then you've got Cease Linder in Goldfinger, who's almost like an older brother stroke father figure. You know, significantly older than Connery, at least in look. Then you get to Diamonds, and you've got a guy who's kind of kind of overweight bureaucrat. And then you get to like Live and Let Die, and you've got a good friend again. And the films have never been consistent in what Felix is meant to be.
I disagree. I mean, I think in terms of like how the actor and the character probably looks, but I think Phoenix has always been kind of like, and like just a general ally, and he's like basically his American ally. It's almost like his just a friend. I mean, it could be like a friend who's like older than him or the same age. It doesn't really matter because the relationship is always the same. The relationship is always the same regardless with him and Bond. But I guess you're kind of right. I mean, his role isn't that important, but I think it's nice. It's like another theme. It's like always, like, of course, he would have like a guy who
he would have equivalents in the trade.
And if you're going to go, I suppose it's more in the books, and I think probably more now. So now they've adapted Casino Royale.
It's the only film that captures it, actually.
Yeah, it's because the way Bond is. I mean, Bond, as ruthless as he is, he does respect loyalty, and in Casino Royale, Phoenix kind of does sort of save his ass. He comes out for him, and they kind of has that mutual respect and admiration for each other. So they will have that. They may not be like best of pals, but it's like when they do meet, they are like, oh hey, how are you, and like kind of do anything for you. It's almost kind of like that really really good friend that you don't see often, but no matter when you see him, he's good friend.
There hasn't been a consistency in characterization, and what I mean by that is...
Well, I guess maybe I'll find out as we watch
Had
it.
the Jack Wade character been called Felix Leiter, you'd have bought it.
Oh no.
Yeah, but you would have gone...
Yeah, that would have been I would agree with you there. That would have been a tonal shift. But,
especially in in Tomorrow Never Dies with the Hawaiian shirts and...
Oh, he was really irritating in Tomorrow Never Dies, to be fair. Sounds like my first marriage, yeah. But certainly, when he comes out of the airport in Goldeneye, and he's got an American CIA agent there, you could have called that guy Felix Leiter.
You could have done, but I will say this. You could have bought it, but then I would have bought that as a reboot of the character, rather than... Like, because in that we already established that M's now a lady, so you could also say like, well, it's just like because GoldenEye, like or not, is like a reboot, kinda. Yeah. Even though it's not typically, but it kind of just.
I can't wait to get to GoldenEye.
But
it's a fascinating point in this series.
Really brilliant.
I'm not as keen on it as some, but it is a fascinating point in this series.
But yeah, I can't wait to talk about all of them. Quite frankly, I just love Bond.
I do think even in this film though, had you cut, you could have cut. It wouldn't have taken much to cut Felix Leiter out of this film.
Oh, actually, you're right. I mean,
it's not actually that important.
No, because his other mates do it like Quarrel. Basically, is
you
like
could totally have changed the way he met Quarrel and Pussfella, right? And he doesn't get involved in the whole Crab Key thing. He is at the end, briefly, but that's not that important. You could have finished with Bond getting off with Honey Rider in any boat with anyone around. He's actually a totally nothing character in this film. And that follows throughout the series in a lot of ways. I mean, when we get...
Do you think probably Felix Leiter is almost like there to... As I will not say sell, but kind of like as a face for American audiences to kind of...
Yeah, we'll see that when we get to Goldfinger.
Yeah,
I'm thinking like, you know, it's like obviously because James Bond is quintessentially British.
Yes.
You know, it's nice to have like one of the good guys American kind of thing to like entice American audiences. I'm not saying that is
I would
legitimately works. You know, whether like
something in that. I mean, I don't know that there are too many Americans in this cast. So you've got a Scotsman, you've got Bernard Lee who's English, obviously you've got Lois Maxwell.
Multicultural.
It's not that multicultural, is it?
No.
So,
and
actually, most of the
what a bunch of white guys.
Most of the Chinese people in this film are Jamaicans aren't. So yeah.
No.
Like the lady with the taking the photograph. She's meant to make her look like she's like slightly Chinese. They put like a rustic band around her head, like to pull
yeah, she got like tape on her eyes and rustic bands and ooh.
And yet, when you actually see that, she was another one dubbed by Nikki Van der Zyl.
Margaret de la War.
When you actually hear her real voice, it's very
Jamaican.
She has a Jamaican look, doesn't she? Lovely.
It's actually quite nice, but yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, I know we haven't actually mentioned Quarrel.
No.
Yeah, we haven't actually talked about Quarrel. I saw a double bill of Dr. No and Goldfinger on the big screen about 2 months ago, and one of the things that really struck me about Quarrel, just the actor, not the character, is when you see this on the big screen, John Kitzmiller, who played Quarrel, has got incredibly yellow whites to his eyes. And I came home I came home and looked him up, and the actor was dead about 2 years later. he had cirrhosis of the liver. He was a severe alcoholic.
Oh no!
And there's a scene in the film where they play some sort of vaguely comical music, and he downs a load of like rum or something.
He does a double take, doesn't he? And
yeah, and I'm just like, oh god, laughing at this guy being a bit of a drunk is not funny now.
No, you're sort of looking at back, and now that's one of the. Well, I said a little bit earlier about how the film stands up. That's one of the scenes that doesn't stand up.
Yeah, I mean,
due to the racism.
At least it wasn't double taking Pigeon. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's true.
God. I just thought of it because there's so many films I'm looking forward to, and then there's Moonraker.
That's the whole series of podcasts in its own, right?
But you've got to be looking
guy to do a double to look at his drink when Bond got up to something.
When he gets out of it, Bondada or
things though. You've got to be looking forward to doing the podcast on Moonraker though.
Oh dear, that's gonna be hilarious. It's a good drinking film because you can take a shot whenever.
Die Another Day is the one I'm actually looking forward to, and the reason I say that is Die Another Day is horrific, but I'm never actually bored by it.
Exactly.
It's entertaining.
I think it. No, I don't even know that I would say entertained, but certainly there are certain Bond movies around the Roger Moore era, certainly late on, where I'm actually a bit bored, and that's never the case with Die Another Day. I'm like laughing at it all the way through quite heartily, and I can't wait to like rip that one a new one. And, But the thing about the Connery era and the thing that really starts here with Dr. No is they aren't super serious. They've got their tongue in their cheek a little bit, but they are all really quality films, well made, told relatively seriously, and we are looking at an era where James Bond ruled the world in film terms, certainly 62 through about 65, and dropping away afterwards. We are in the golden era of Bond, and when we talk about that, we might be in a second golden era now, but we'll come to that. I certainly think these are a very special period that you've got Sean Connery at his peak before he got bored, started wearing dodgy wigs and gaining weight.
We got greedy.
Yeah. You've got everyone interested, all the films looking good, all the films told fairly straight, and I'm not saying without humour, but not parody. And they are all so much of their time. And with Mad Men and Archer and other things like that, the early 60s are really, really cool again. And it's wonderful to stick on a Bond film and just see that.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned Archer, actually. I think that's probably one of the best Bond homages or parodies, whichever way you want to skew it. Because even though it's obviously set in the 1960s, offers apart from Series 5 when
it's actually set all over the place, really.
The 80s, yeah. I don't know, it's kind of, it's not set in the 60s, but it's got the kind of look about it, even though it's modern day references and modern day technology and things like that.
There's something that is, and this is where, for all I say about Roger Moore, I feel a little bit sorry for him, because he was Bond in the era that taste forgot.
Poor Roger, I shall be defending him.
The 70s had wonderful music and a lot of great films and all the rest of it, but you cannot compare Dr. No with like Roger Moore in a nylon safari suit. There's just no comparison. He's cool and the nice suits, and I went to see it, and when they cut back to London after like Strangways has been killed, and you just see that sort of bank of phones and everything else, it's so much of its era, and they're all smoking as well.
Oh God, yeah.
So much of the era, I just had a big smile on my face. And Bond never can recapture that, because we'll never have the early to mid, we'll never have the 1960s.
No, political correctness.
It's just the look and the feel of the 60s, rather than like the, should we say,
it's not the politics of it.
I mean, I suppose that has a hand in it, but yeah, generally. It's
I don't yearn for a time that Bond is slapping women again.
No,
and I don't.
Nobody wants that.
It's nothing to do with that.
But would you love to see Bond smoke?
No, not really. Okay. I don't think it's that important.
No,
I don't, and particularly now, because we know it's not that I would. It's not that I would object to Bond smoking. It's more the fact that it's more about realism. It's more.
Yeah, you don't really need it, I don't think.
This guy is ex-military. Well, he still is military because it's Military Intelligence 6.
Sure.
But this guy is, certainly in the film version of this franchise, he's called on to do quite a lot of action, and puffing 70 a day is not really commensurate with that.
No, it doesn't really work out. So
I'm not really bothered about him smoking either way. I mean, even by Dalton, it was starting to look a bit anachronistic. He was sat in Q's lab having a fag, and I was thinking, are we smoking?
Health and safety.
Yeah, and now, obviously, whenever I see anyone smoking indoors anywhere in a film, it looks really odd.
No, it looks bizarre.
We've had the smoking ban for so long. It's not the politics of the era I miss. It's It's just look and feel. It's literally just that, and I don't yearn for that. Casino Royale and Goldeneye. There are other Bond films we will get to that are in many ways the equal or better of what we're talking about tonight. But what we won't have is that iconography of the era. There was something about Bond through Majesties that never got recaptured afterwards, just because of the era it was made in.
Just because of bloody 70s, basically.
Bloody 70s? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, look at the difference between... I know they're very different films, but look at the difference between Majesties and Diamonds Are
It literally is, and spoilers for this, it literally is like one of the best in the series to pretty much the worst entry.
You've gone from an elegant... there's signs of the 70s starting to come in that Lazenby's got like a bit of like a puffy shirt going on, a bit of a wrap on his tuxedo.
He wears a quilt or what?
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it is still just about a 60s film. And you get to Diamonds Are Forever, and you've gone from one of the prettiest films in the series to one of the ugliest. And there is just something about the 60s and Bond we'll never get again. But time does have an effect on these things, in that we go forward 3 or 4 decades from now, and people will be possibly looking at Casino Royale and Spectre and all the rest of it and saying, why don't Bond films look like that anymore?
No, that's true, actually. You probably get to the point where you look back on the 90s with fondness somehow and think, oh, well, why didn't it,
Poor old Roger Moore, nylon safari suits and disco soundtracks.
Oh, dear. I feel... I'm quite a fan of Roger, but I would say I do kind of feel sorry for him. The safari suit featured for, 5-10 minutes in one chase scene in one film.
Yeah, but
he rocked it.
I picture him in a nylon safari suit in every scene he's in.
Yeah, pretty much. I say that's what he goes down for. It's like, well...
But it isn't just that, though. There are plenty of attractive women and sets and locations in the 70s films. And there's plenty about the 70s, even style-wise, I quite like. But all I'm saying is, you look at Majesties, you look at Dr. No, that casino scene. We've had casino scenes in almost every Bond film. But that one...
That's the quintessential one, though.
Only have been shot in the 60s.
Definitely. You've even got Pierce Brosnan and
Goldeneye's
that doesn't look the same. Not quite the same.
Goldeneye's the closest, though. If you talk about good-looking, timeless casino scenes, Goldeneye would be right up there.
Definitely. Even obviously, Casino Royale. Sorry. Even Casino Royale, it doesn't quite have that panache.
No, it doesn't. There's something about So it's just a magic. They might have done this in the late 50s. I don't know. The only danger is it could have been black and white, I guess, the earlier you go. But I've never really looked into why they went for this in colour, because there was still quite a lot of black and white being made, and black and white film stock is cheaper.
No, that's it. Well, I think, obviously, at the beginning of the 60s, you had late 50s, early 60s, you had the kitchen sink movies coming out of England and Britain, sort of very much based in sort of like domesticity and the troubles of the everyday working man. So maybe this was trying to get away from that, perhaps.
I guess probably...
It's got a wonderful feeling of escapism to it.
Yeah, I guess also there's probably an element of the fact that this was like a tightly budget film with a lack of star quality. So the fact that it was in colour was another attraction?
No.
Okay.
I guess as well...
That's true, yeah.
I guess as well we've got... we talk about the tight budget, but salaries would have been quite light. There's no Cary Grant in this film.
Yeah.
No, I imagine this probably would have been Connery's
Which
lowest.
nearly could have been. Nearly could have been.
It nearly could have been.
In alternate future, would have had a Cary Grant one-off Bond film. That's it.
Yeah.
Richard Burton, oh god, the list is endless.
Richard Burton I'd be alright with. Cary Grant less so.
Well, he's American for starters.
Well, he's not actually. He's from Bristol.
Is he?
Yeah, he is. He's a local man.
Well, I shall just.
Have you ever seen a fish called Wanda?
I shall just hand in my fucking. You know what?
You ever seen a fish called Wanda, Chris?
Actually, I haven't. I've seen bits of it.
All right. Well, anyway, John Cleese's character in that is called Archie Leach.
Yeah, that's Cary Grant's real name.
That's Cary Grant's real name.
You have to see that film. It's so funny.
It's really good.
Oh.
But anyway, Cary Grant's
from the nose, Ken.
Cary Grant's from Bristol, and his accent was so funny to Americans. Go watch Some Like It Hot. Tony Curtis is basically taking the piss out of Cary.
Yeah, the Cary Grant impression.
Yeah, that's what.
I don't know. I always picture
that's
Cary
what he's
Grant
doing in that film. He's doing a parody of Cary Grant.
I am gonna go and YouTube Cary Grant right now because, oh my god,
it's really weird his accent. It's not quite. It's not like
It's not even mid-Atlantic. I mean, to Americans,
no, I was gonna say,
to Americans, it must sound like Dick Van Dyke sounds to us.
Yeah, somewhere in between.
You know, it's really strange. But I mean, the closest
yeah,
thing
one of
we
the
had
biggest movie stars of all time.
I mean, one of the big, I mean, the closest thing we had to a Bond film before Bond, I think, was North by Northwest.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is Cary Grant. So I mean, he
semi-Bond film.
But if you wanted the series we've got now, where you've got a British guy in the role, albeit it could be played by somebody else, but somebody who convinces you he's British, I don't think the way to start it is Cary Grant. But Richard Burton, I could totally see. We will get to like missed opportunities as we go through the series, because there have not only been people who were very nearly cast as Bond, there were people who were actually cast as Bond who we didn't see.
Didn't Ian Fleming want James Stewart or somebody like that?
David Niven.
David Niven, that was it. Yeah. So. Okay.
He talked to Noel Coward, who was a neighbour of his in Jamaica, about playing Dr. No.
That would have been interesting.
That would have been weird.
Will, dear boy.
I cannot picture it. But, you know, who knows? But he wanted David Niven when you read the literary. But, yeah, as we go through the series, there are some astonishing casting choices. Okay. And we're not just talking about Pierce Brosnan missing out and coming back to it. When we will see future Bonds miss out at certain times. We will see Bonds talked about at one point, you get it years later. But we will also see casting choices that will blow your mind. People that are like, they were really looking at that person honestly.
Your jaw will drop.
Largely as we get through
Adam
the
West
era,
Adam West, yes.
Yeah, but as we get through, as we go through the Roger Moore era, there are an awful lot of alternate choices that nearly were Bond. And with me and my prejudices, I tend to think it's because the producers knew Roger Moore was rubbish. So all the way through, they were like, "Who can we replace this guy with?"
I
think we were one screen test away from getting Zippy from Rainbow to play the role.
Zippy, oh my god.
Well, yeah, some of the casting choices aren't that more
Mr. Bond.
Sensible. Yeah, but
my bad Zippy impression.
That was really terrible. But as we go through,
oh Geo, step it.
You know, sorry. I mean, the one I'll review, the one that always intrigues me, and most people turn their nose up at it simply because of his private life. But there was a time we could have had Oliver Reed as James Bond.
Ooh.
And I think that would have been phenomenal at his peak.
Lots of drama on and off screen.
Well, he had those sort of Daniel Craig piercing blue eyes. And he would have played a very tough version of the role around the time we ended up with Roger Moore.
I think
there was an alternate universe where I always picture somewhere around the early Moore era we get a faithful adaptation of Moonraker starring Oliver Reed, and I think
a ginger villain.
I think
and a ginger villain, yeah. Cast Nicholas Witchell, it would be brilliant.
Oh. Royal correspondent.
If I'd say if you want a sneak preview of what it could have been like as Oliver Reed as Bond, watch the Assassination Bureau. It's a film he did with Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas and the guy who played in the bad guy in Spy Who Loved Me, Strongbow.
Jurgens.
Yeah. It's basically it's like starring with a Bond girl with two Bond villains.
Bond light, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so I checked that out. It's actually quite an entertaining watch, quite an interesting kind of random 60s kind of film about a league of assassins, essentially.
When we get to the Living Daylights as well, we'll get to one of the most involved casting stories in the whole Bond history. But we go through quite a lot of them in the Roger Moore era. Joking aside, forget my opinions on Roger Moore. There was a lot of umming and ahhing, and he was on one film at a time, and they kept looking to the future, wondering if they'd have Roger back for the next film. And it's really fascinating. And I think it's easy now to look back at Dr. No and take it for granted. Well, we got a very, whatever you think of Honey Rider, we got a beautiful Bond girl. We got the quintessence. We got a terrific cast as James Bond, and he wasn't an obvious one. They were talking about David Niven and others, people with a very, very different quality to Roger Moore.
He's a complete unknown.
We got still the best, I think, M in the series, all the way through that cast, and the set designers, music. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Chris, Monty Norman and John Barry. We take that for granted now. It could have had some generic score that was completely forgettable.
But that Monty,
Bedtime.
Yes.
Monty Norman.
That Monty Norman riff is just like iconic, and it's just embedded in that series now. It's like it's you play that, and everyone in the world will know instantly what that means. And
that's how these things often come about, aren't they? Kind of like organic like that. I mean, it's like the Jaws theme tune.
Oh yeah, exactly.
John Williams had like a more complicated score, and Spielberg was like, "No, go away, redo it," or however the story goes, and he's like, no, and it's just like, wow,
Yeah,
and that's the most iconic movie scores of all time.
You take it for granted, but the number of films we all walk out of where someone say, "What was the score like?" And I didn't notice.
That's it. Yeah, if it doesn't resonate with you, then it's not worth it. So,
and everything. I mean, even if you go back and look at even the advertising campaigns of this film, go back and look at the poster for Dr. No or From Russia with Love.
I love the hand-drawn posters. I'll have to think of the name of the artist.
Style, and really we get that right the way through. Well, right up to about Moonraker, really. Arguably even a little bit further. I mean, the Bond posters now are actually really bland by comparison.
The one for Spectre, you've got like Bond against a grey background with the Spectre, and you think, I mean, it's good because you can see all the references to Live and Let Die and aspects of his character and things like that. But it's quite very stripped down, very bare, and.
Well, I mean, the
dull.
Skyfall advertising campaign was awful.
Oh yeah, that was quite dire, wasn't it?
It really was.
Not very exciting.
It worked though, but.
Well, it worked, yes.
But enough, yeah.
Compare it to the colourful 60s posters. I mean, you've only got to look at like Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever for them to get like even more campy, for example.
Well, I think it's just like I think it's just like, well, let's just have Bond with a gun. That's pretty much all it is to it.
I mean, I'd rather the film was good. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. I mean, look at Moonraker. I kind of like the poster for that. The film's awful. So I mean, it's not the most important thing in the world, but there was just a confluence of events that you had. Forget what you think of him as an actor. You have one of the most charismatic film stars of all time, and he is a film star, and you don't grasp that until you see him on the big screen. I mean, we'll get to Majesties later, and I'll defend Lazenby quite hard, but there's no way that he has that screen presence that Connery had. You've got a really good cast around him, whether they're names or not. You've got one of the best set designers ever in John Barry. You've got one of the best film score guys I can think of, composers. And just everything about it just surfed a wave of luck. And they did manage to make a relatively small budget, 300,000 in British pounds, stretched quite a long way. And this could have been a cheapie. I mean, you've only got to look at the TV teleplay of Casino Royale from the 1950s with Barry Nelson to see what this film could have been. It could have been a very, very quickly knocked out film in black and white with a zero budget. Some British cheaply made thing that never went anywhere. And here we are, and the latest Bond film did 1.1 million, nearly 1.2 million. This series owes so much to this film. And I know it sounds obvious because it's the first, of course, but they really did nail quite a lot of this out of the gate.
Yeah, the DNA is there, is in Dr.
Definitely. No. It's a blueprint for the franchise.
Yeah, and it feels more like a Bond film than next week's does, in a strange
time.
Oh,
yeah, definitely.
From Russia with Love's a terrific film, and
definitely.
There's no spoiler in that. I think we're all going to speak very highly of it.
We are, for sure.
But it is less a Bond film than this is.
Sure, yeah, it's more of a kind of Cold War spy thriller, which is kind of what it's meant to be. But
it is kind of it is the Bond series attempt at a Hitchcock film. we'll get to, as I said, then the following week we get to Guy Hamilton, who introduced a couple of interesting tropes we'll get to, but so much of it is already here. We've got the gun barrel. I know it's used slightly differently, but we have James Bond, we have him in the tux, we have him in a casino, we have the villain's lair, we have the Bond girl. The only thing I think we're really lacking, apart from a Q scene, is a decent henchman.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah,
but
even
all the ingredients are there.
You could say the Flea by Mice guys. They're kind of like henchmen. I mean, they're not used like as majorly, but they do have like their own thing. You know what I mean? They have like their own kind of like their own characteristic, their own thing they play with. The fact that they're three guys who pretend to be blind. And then shoot people. And drive around in hearse.
I also like at this stage that
Thingy, Spider Guy got,
Anthony Wilson.
Yeah, he gets shot.
Thingy.
Yeah. Sorry.
I love that scene. I mean,
you've had your six.
Craig of anything done.
Oh yeah, that's terrible. Yeah, you've had your six. Oh my god, bang bang bang.
When we get to Craig, I'll point to scenes that remind me of Connery. But certainly, yeah, I love that scene. The other thing I really like about the Bond films of this era, and you don't even know you're seeing it in all cases, is that we've got a bit of a sort of company going on here, in as much as Terence Young directs 3 of the first 4. You've got, obviously, Connery in all of them. You've got all the principal cast we know. But most of the crew comes back. Peter Hunt edits the first 6, the first 5 and directs number 6. You've got John Barry. He doesn't not compose a Bond film until you get to Live and Let Die. And even actors getting reused. I mean, next week we'll meet a lady who's also in Goldfinger. And she's in a very small role in both of them. But Anthony Dawson, we see him this week. Professor Dent, he gets shot by Bond. Next week we will see him as the hands and body of Blofeld.
Yeah, there's a very cameo role there.
And voiced by the guy who did Doctor No.
Yeah.
Well, what was his name? I want to say Eric Anderson, but I think that's completely wrong.
I think you might be right. I need to have a look, double check that one.
All right.
Joseph Wiseman.
Joseph Wiseman was the guy, but he was.
I can't remember his name.
Oh right, sorry. The guy actually did his voice.
Did the voice, yeah.
Yeah. But there's a bit of a company, as I say. Nikki van der Zyl voices Tatiana. The next week she does both Mastersons. She does, she doesn't do Pussy Galore, obviously, but the following week she voices Domino. There is a certain company of talent that turns up every year.
It's the same people again, isn't it?
Yeah, every year, right through the 60s. And that's why the 60s films all kind of feel of a piece, with the possible exception of one. I would say You Only Live Twice feels kind of different to the rest of these. But you've just got the same talent turning up every year. And the first 4, and certainly 5 of the first 6 for me, are just pure gold, because you've got so much talent at the peak of their game.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point actually. I think he brought it to a coda, which is really nice. So.
Yeah, and
maybe I wasted in this job.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got certainly the next 3 weeks really excite me. As we get beyond that, the quality varies for me, but there will be plenty to talk about, good and bad. But certainly in terms of the gold standard of the Bond era, this series starts so strong, and I can't wait for next week, because we might just be coming to the best pure film in the series, if not the best Bond film.
It definitely ranks high though. Whenever you hear interviews of cast and crew on the Bond movies, the chances are their number 1 film will be From Russia with Love. So
yeah, they're wrong, but I'll take that up with them later.
Oh, well, yeah, apart from.
But yeah, certainly, forgetting the Bond film aspect of it, what we're about to see next week is an extremely well-made film.
I was going to mention earlier, what are the 2, you're talking about like henchmen, and there's a bit, is it Sister Rose and, what was her name, is like the 2 nurses that look after Bond and Honey, and they poison the drinks and stuff. You think, oh my god, I forgot about them as well, I didn't talk about them.
Yeah, and I've forgotten their names now.
No, I know one's Sister Rose and the other one's something, suddenly.
Yeah, but they're just like secretaries, really.
Yeah, they're just like throwaway roles.
We don't really get a decent. Well, I'll say about that. No, we get a very good henchman next week.
Yeah, iconic henchman. Okay, so I'll say something to wrap up the end. Thanks Dave, thanks Chris, and do you expect us to talk? We'll return with From Russia with Love.